Today is July 7th, 2023. My name is Karen Neurohr. I work for the Oklahoma State University Library in the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. And today I'm with Dr. Rachel Jackson at her home in Oklahoma City. We are here today to talk about her experience during the COVID-19 pandemic in Oklahoma. Upon the agreement of Dr. Jackson, this interview will be archived at the OSU Library for future generations to see. Thank you for agreeing to participate in this interview today.
My pleasure.
So let's start by just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in Oklahoma City, right here in this house. And I was born in 1974, and my parents were Jim and Connie Jackson, and they were also born in Oklahoma. My mom was born in Webb City. My dad was born in Quay, outside of Yale, outside of Stillwater. And they met in Shidler, Oklahoma. I have two older brothers, Van Jackson and Lee Jackson. And they live in Broken Arrow and Colgate, respectively. And until the pandemic, well, mostly through the pandemic, I was living in Norman and teaching at the university. I finished my PhD there in 2016 and did a short stint at OSU in a postdoc, and then went back to OU in a tenure track position.
And when did you go back to OU?
I was hired back in the fall of 2019. Yes, in the English department, and I teach for two programs in the English department, and that is the Native American Literature and Cultural Studies program, and then also the Rhetoric and Writing Studies program.
Okay. So take me back to when you first started hearing about the coronavirus. What are your memories of first realizing this pandemic was going to significantly affect day-to-day life?
Well, I would have to say I first heard of it perhaps about a week and a half before lockdown, if I'm thinking correctly. I had a friend that was a little bit more tuned in than me, to the news. And she was doing things like going to the store and buying cleaning products and, paper towels and Lysol and stuff like that. And I thought she might have been overly concerned,
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember her talking to me about it prior to actually getting any sort of official news, which came through the university, came through OU. It was the week before spring break.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Friday was March 13th, if I remember correctly. It's a Friday the 13th. That seems appropriate.
That does.
Yeah, and I could be wrong. It could just be me thinking it was really that bad. But anyway, and we started getting news from, upper level administration that, we may not be coming back from spring break for a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, this must be serious,
Mm-hmm.
And of course the students were getting, the undergrads and the graduate students were getting word of all this. And so there was a little bit of low-lying, low-level panic, just a little bit, because nobody could quite understand what was it, the enormity of what we were facing,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't want to take it seriously because of the fear factor. So there was some joking and things like that going on. But it was the Friday before spring break when I believe the university said we'll not be coming back,
Mm-hmm.
at least for a couple weeks. And from there, they just kept, and I think they called, we won't come back this semester, pretty soon thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would say I was a late, compared to some people who were tuning in and watch the news more faithfully than I'm able to. I was kind of late to the party, so to speak, but caught on quickly
Mm-hmm.
once it became obvious that it was real. Yeah.
So after spring break, then you shifted to online teaching?
Yes. We learned very quickly, the ropes of teaching on Zoom. And, of course, I'd been in one-on-one meetings in Zoom and sometimes group meetings in Zoom prior to that with colleagues in other parts of the country. And so I kind of had a sense of how Zoom worked. But the enormity of having, 20 undergraduate students on one Zoom screen, and trying to maintain any sort of semblance of in-class activities and in-class discussion, and was kind of a overwhelming task to wrap my brain around in the moment. Mm-hmm. In addition to the overwhelm of just, the living through the beginnings of a pandemic that we were all going through. So yes, there was that week of spring break, was sort of lying on the couch, looking at the ceiling, wondering what to do to make it through the rest of the semester. And when the students came back, of course, they had their own sets of needs in addition to just maintaining regular course objectives.
What stands out to you about that? About their needs?
Yes,
what was happening?
Well, I can only maybe compare it to things that I've been through. When I was their age, the Oklahoma City bombing happened. I was in college when that happened in 95. So I can kind of remember for the first several months after that, particularly, as you're working from ground zero, so to speak, of the beginning of the event, you kind of stammered and stunned. And I would say that's very much where they, the looks on their faces, the bewilderment, more difficulty concentrating, lots of just kind of students going MIA, for a week or two at a time, and needing to kind of reach out to them and make sure they're okay. And, there was just a lot of overwhelm. And that makes, accomplishing anything intellectual difficult when your executive functioning is, kind of overwhelmed like that. Mm-hmm. But I was fortunate. I was teaching a class called Story as Medicine, so it kind of folded very nicely into the theme of the course. And, we did talk about the pandemic through that lens. And what story are we going to make of this? And, in our own lives and in our communities, in our country and globally. And so the students, we were able to harness a little bit of that with the undergraduates. Mm-hmm. Yes, in my undergraduate course.
What do you remember about the lockdowns and how it affected your day-to-day activities?
Honestly, I remember at first feeling relief because you did not, you had no choice. You you had to stay home, mm-hmm. So there was no kind of running around or sometimes, the day is stacked where you have to be here and you have to be there and, on campus, different parts of campus, and of course town and for appointments and things like that. And that was not happening, mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. so there was a part of me that was really just kind of like, mm-hmm. this isn't so bad,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, I lived alone. And so that was, I think, everybody's experience of it was so dependent upon their position, in the world and in life when it started. And I was living alone. So in some ways that made it easier. I didn't have to worry about anybody else bringing anything in. And I didn't have to deal with the tension of being stuck in the house with other people, But then on the other hand, everything was kind of up to me, to make sure that I stayed safe. So I do remember feeling that pressure, anxiety around that. Make sure I'm doing everything right, mm-hmm. And having to pay attention to what they were recommending that we do. you know, and washing, all those groceries by oneself. is a little aggravating, but yeah, I think I did feel a lot more space in my life, though, and I needed that on some level. We all needed it, I think. We all do. We need more downtime, but I also think very quickly I started to develop a strange sort of agoraphobia. Like maybe we all went through that the self-isolation made me really sensitive to being around people again once that slowly became an opportunity. So, it required a lot of self-reflection to make sure that am I staying safe or am I being, am I self-isolating, out of some other reason.
Did you have a pet at that time?
No, I got Zia. I got Zia in May. The pandemic started in March, at least in our state when we went on lockdown. And then Zia came along 2 months later. Yeah, that helped. She kept me busy. Yes.
Okay. Describe the work you do with the Kiowa community and how the pandemic affected that.
Oh, my. Well, since about 2007, I have been involved in the Kiowa Clementi course for the humanities, which is offered through University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma in Chickasha. And that project has always meant a lot to me because both my mom and her sister, my Aunt Dorothy, were alumnus of Oklahoma College for Women, which is what USAO was before that. And so I was really eager to be able to work on a project with USAO when it started, but it was a very interesting course design. It's changed over the years. The Clementi courses were started in the Bronx in New York City at the Roberto Clemente Center, which is where they get their name. But it essentially is a program that was designed to offer free lower level college credit to people that wouldn't otherwise be able to access college because of tuition costs. And they were classes offered in the evening and childcare and food and really encouraging, people trying to build a bridge for lower income folks. And so that model kind of got taken up by the National Endowment for the Humanities, I believe, the Clementi course model. And eventually, Howard Meredith, Dr. Howard Meredith at USAO, he was a Indian studies teacher. They call it Indian studies there. Started a Clementi course, several Clementi courses in indigenous communities here in Oklahoma. And I think those started around 1998, 99. They started putting those things together. And with the help of Kiowa students at USAO, they organized this Kiowa Clementi class. And it is a design where there are elders and then college professors that talk about the same topic. So let's say the topic is property. Well, John Locke would be what the professor of philosophy might come in and teach, and then the Kiowa elder would tell a story about property and what it meant in Kiowa history. So that course, I started teaching it in 2007, and slowly it changed. It became more about Kiowa humanities strictly. We weren't bringing in the Western content anymore. And every week we do a language lesson of some sort, usually curated by Grandma Dorothy Whitehorse Stallone, who I work with, her memory and what she wants to tell and share, and the language emerges from that. And we, talk about history. We read archival ethnography field notes. We read, books that have been out of print, but, early ethnographic studies of the Kiowa, and talk about them. And Grandma Dorothy contributes what she remembers. And We have a lot of, it's in, before the pandemic, it was offered in Anadarko at a community center there. And we met in person and we shared a meal, and it was wonderful, to be together. But the people who came were, members of the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma, and many of them were grandmothers themselves, younger than Dorothy, but grandmothers themselves. And after the pandemic, it just became very obvious that that was a community that we needed to keep particularly safe. Mm-hmm. And so we started Zooming, and Grandma Dorothy's daughters learned how to get her on Zoom on her end in Anadarko, and then here, and then the students would come in as they were able. And we started that immediately, as I learned how to do it for my classes at OU. We started immediately after spring break with online classes for the Kiowa class. And what was amazing about it is, while we missed being with each other, we were able, the Kiowas from all over the place, the country, were able to come to class. Yeah. So whereas before we had people in the Anadarko and Carnegie, community down where the Kiowas live, now we have people from Missouri and California and Hawaii and, Washington, D.C. and just, all over the place coming to class. And we're able to record them, mm-hmm. So we were recording our classes in person, but in some ways this is more effective because you get everybody's faces and everybody's comments. So we've kept it going. It's probably the hardest part about it was that we did lose one of the elders that worked closely with the class for a long time. His name was J.T. Goombai, and he was a very good friend, in addition to a big help with the class. Joseph Titus Goombai, and I wish I could tell you what year he was born, but I think it was the late 30s. And he was former Kiowa tribal chairman, and he worked with the National Congress of American Indians, and he was quite an active advocate for the Kiowa and Native people. And we lost him, and that was in a hard way, because he was alone in the hospital. Nobody could see him. And the Kiowas have lost many elders, from the pandemic, like many Native communities. So there was that reality of it too. But Grandma Dorothy, her daughters kept her safe. So she's 91 now. So we're still rolling. Oh, good. But our research together was impacted by it too. Getting together to work on things, and mm-hmm. we haven't really started that again. Yeah. We're still meeting via Zoom. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Every week through the school year, Thursday nights. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What were some of the ways that supervisors and or the university helped faculty deal with the stressors of working during that time? Well, I can speak for my department and I can speak for the college, there's a lot of breathing room, I think we were getting encouraged to give that to the students. Be gentle, be patient, be kind. They're carrying a lot, give them leeway on deadlines and, really being encouraged to nurture and support them, mm-hmm. And I think, I tend to be that kind of teacher anyway. And many people in our profession are that way, but they were asking us to really amp it up and to give extra cushion. And in many ways I saw that for faculty as well. I do kind of wish the students would have got the message to be patient with faculty too, because some of them in their overwhelm, in their increase in need, you know, I was overwhelmed too, you know, and so their increase in need, I think in certain moments, it was kind of like the buck stopped with the faculty. You know, we had to absorb this kind of behavior from them, and when we ourselves also needed extra patience. But I would say, or that we needed other people to have extra patience with us, is what I mean. But I would say that, you know, my department and the college were all very gentle and interested in our safety. You know, I was caring for elderly parents at the time, which is a huge part of the story. And so I needed to stay extra safe because I was the one that was taking them to doctor's appointments when they needed to go somewhere. Or would be the person responsible for being in bodily in-person contact with them if a crisis arose. So I was given additional time to teach online. And that was so helpful, you know, just to be able to know that I was going to be safe so they could be safe. And that was a huge relief. So I left the classroom, you know, in like everybody else in March of 2020. And I was not back in person until this past spring of 2023.
Oh.
Yes, for various reasons, but caring for my parents cared for my mother through the spring of 2022. And then I had sabbatical in the fall of 22. And then not sabbatical, but research semester, and then back to teaching. So 3 years I was out of the classroom, which is really remarkable that I was able to have that. And so my department was, you know, very supportive. And trying to think, we got an additional year on tenure, those of us who came in that year, which I did, you know, or people who were on the tenure clock were given an additional year because so much was impeded, you know, in terms of research and just, you know, the logistics of everything had to change.
Do you think 1 year was enough?
No.
Yeah.
No, I really don't. But it's better than nothing. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, the especially for those of us, and many of us did, that had extenuating circumstances that were, you know, just kind of amplified and complicated, you know. It's like everything that in my life that, you know, because my parents were aging and we had put them into assisted living in August of 2019, the same time I was starting my job at OU. I moved them out of this house and into assisted living in Edmond. You know, there's already a kind of frailty, you know, when you're dealing with aging parents. That, I mean, when I say frailty, I mean kind of an emotional tenuousness. You know, you're just always kind of waiting for the next thing to happen. You know what I mean? And you just kind of get used to this constant kind of need that they have for you. So there was already that, which is a strain on executive functioning. But then to go through the pandemic and all of those rapid adjustments, in addition to them being on lockdown, not being able to be with them, and care for them in the way that I felt like I needed to, you know, it's just a lot of strain on a person's ability to function. You know, I have learned so much about the brain under stress and under grief and, you know, over the last few years, because I had to figure out why I couldn't do what I normally could do. You know, I could not. I'm a very organized person. I'm a planner, you know, and it would all get shuffled and I would just get lost in the calendar or the day, or, you know, it's very difficult to think straight. And so, yes, getting tenure is hard when you can't do that.
Yeah. Well, and then you beat yourself up over it.
You do beat yourself up over it. So there's the layer of that, the kind of, oh, I should be able to handle this. Why am I, what's happening to me, and shame and guilt and yes, and constantly afraid you're going to screw something up because you don't remember, so lots of anxiety. And technology became very overwhelming. Just screens became very overwhelming to me because of the constant communicating via those things and the emails piling up and just wanting to sink into the bed and not get out of it. Because you're like, it's all too hard. It's all too hard right now, and I just can't. And that's not like me. I'm not like that. But during this period of time, it was definitely a lot of mental health struggle. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember when you first began wearing the masks, and maybe gloves too, but the mask?
I do, yes. Over that spring break, I made some. Yep. I had a sewing machine in my house, and I had fabric and elastic, and I just went to town on it. Got a pattern off of the internet. I got better at it as time went, but yes, I made masks over spring break, and then they just started becoming widely available, but almost immediately.
Do you remember when you stopped wearing them out in public?
The last time I wore a mask was on the first plane ride, which for me, post, pandemic plane ride, which was April of this year.
Oh, yeah.
But I was on a plane, and many of my friends were coming back from plane trips with COVID. So I had my N95 on. I was the only one on the plane with it on, but I did not get sick. And I still don't have a habit of, really fundamentally, my habits have changed. I'm not out in public as much. But yeah, I haven't worn a mask out in public on a regular basis, I would say, since my mom died, really. Yeah. So that would have been April of 22. I started kind of phasing them out.
Yeah. Do you remember the COVID relief funding that came?
We got some through, yes, I do. I do remember that. Yes. And then we also had the Cherokee Nation payments. Yes. Yes. I don't know. I can't even tell you what I did with mine. Probably paid off my credit card or something. Yeah.
Did you have any tense situations talking with friends or families about the pandemic?
Well, yeah. As I mentioned, I have two older brothers, and my parents, my mother, because of her, she had dementia, and the pandemic was not good for her, because isolating her further from people that she knew, and dealing with someone with dementia, at least dealing with her and her dementia, the more that she could, have interaction and go do things that were relatively normal, like go out to eat or go walk around an antique store or something, it seemed to help keep her skills from declining as fast as they did after lockdown happened. So with my mom kind of increasingly unable to communicate, right, I was communicating more with my dad. And my dad had macular degeneration. So he couldn't see very well except for out here, peripheral. So he had no idea what my mom was doing. Here they are in their little assisted living apartment, but he can't see unless he's looking at her this way, So he could not keep track of, is she even bathing? Is she, what is she brushing her teeth? Is she washing her hair? And I had tense conversations with him about it because he wanted so much for me to be able to come and help. And I would have to tell him, Dad, I can't, because they won't let me in. And this just in his 86-year-old mind, did not make any sense at all. Because, for him, they brought up politics and, the country and how can you do this to people? How can you cut people off from their families? And I would have to say, Dad, I know it's terrible, but it's to keep us safe. It's keep you safe, but it was very hard to get him to understand. It was just very hard to be cut off from your family, period. Especially when it feels like kind of your own life is mounting into crisis after crisis. So conversations with him on the phone could sometimes be very, very much about talking him out of a tree, and getting him to calm down. And, as he was more agitated, it's hard to live with a person who has dementia. So, that's stressful enough. And so watching how his interactions with my mom and his patience with my mom also decreased. And my desire, and my parents had a very loving marriage and lasted for a long time, but just under the strain of all this, his temper, God bless him, was harder for him to contain. And he would, yell or, raise his voice or say harsh things. And I didn't like the idea of my mom having to be around that because, she's just very, increasingly easy to confuse and disorient. And so I'm sure I was tense too. I tried not to be, but there were definitely moments where, you give patience is thinning and we just have to get off the phone, and wait until we calm down and talk again. And then just negotiating decisions with my brothers who had a very different take on the pandemic. We have very different news sources. Let's just put it that way. And so very different take on the pandemic than I did. And trying to make decisions with them about what to do with Mom and Dad. I wanted to get them out of there. I said, well, why don't we just buy a bigger house here in Norman and I'll take them in and, we'll be safe and I can organize their healthcare from here. And that would be less stressful for me, less stressful for them. But nobody wanted to go along with that. It's just like, people, I think to some extent were in denial that it was as big a deal as it was, So, there was just a lot of swallowing my pride and having to be like, okay, okay, if this is what I wasn't going to push, not my nature to do that, but it did require just a lot of patience and acceptance and prayer, faith, and my parents did end up contracting COVID, both of them supposedly. We never saw the tests saying that they tested positive, but they did end up testing positive in December of 2020 in their facility.
At that, were they still in lockdown phase of the facility before they contracted
Yes, because they, the facility stayed in lockdown much longer than anybody else did. And I guess if you didn't have a family member in a facility, you wouldn't know that. But they were on lockdown, at least at their facility, from March through April of the following year. So 2020 through 2021.
After the vaccinations came out.
The vaccinations came out in February, like January, February. Yeah. And they were both vaccinated. And yes, then the lockdown lifted a little bit. You still had to take your temperature when you came in. They didn't really want you taking them far and wide and bringing them back to the facility. So there were still some restrictions, but lockdown was a full year. And they contracted it in December of that full year of lockdown. And that's when things really started to get crazy. The facility never really told us what the plan was if there was an outbreak, And in retrospect, if they did, I don't remember it, but I truly don't believe they told us what would happen if there would be an outbreak. But because my parents tested positive, or we were told they tested positive, we were told we had to come get them, or they were going to be put on a transport to another facility where they were keeping older age people in these homes that were testing positive. They were like COVID wards. And it sounds like science fiction to a certain extent when I say it out loud now. But, when you're faced with two elderly parents who have tested positive and you have the decision to make, do I pick them up and bring them home? Are they going to or do we, that doesn't happen overnight. And we were told at 4:00 that they had tested positive. And by 9:00 the next morning, they were on a transport to Enid from Edmond to an old nursing home facility that had been converted into a COVID ward. And they were giving them what they were giving people. I can't remember the medicines, but, to try to combat the symptoms. And yeah, they were both sharing one little tiny nursing home room in Enid for about 5 weeks.
Wow.
And, we could talk to them on the phone. There was one phone in the whole facility. They were moving around. It was a cordless. And, I could, looking at them through torn up, blinds, leveler blinds. Oh man, it was not, we were paying for a very nice facility for my parents. My parents were paying for a nice facility, which, as everyone knows, is not cheap, even though everyone deserves one in their old age, And so for 5 weeks, they were in another facility that, you wouldn't really leave your dog in. You know what I mean? I hate to say that, but I know they were doing the best they could at the time, I suppose. The state, I'm not sure who that was arranged through. My brother thought that it was something that the insurance companies were responsible for, because the insurance companies were a part of, because the insurance companies were covering all that. And so he saw it as an insurance kind of scheme, But because they didn't have room for all these folks in the hospitals, I guess this is just where they moved them. And if they worsened, they would go into the hospital, which Dad did at one point, go into the hospital at Enid. And again, you can't go in. You can't, so I'm on the phone with him. He's hallucinating. He's having terrible nightmares. He has no idea what has happened, where he is. He was put on a bus and taken somewhere, and he's got no idea where he is. So he's just like totally, totally disoriented and having terrible dreams, I suppose, because of maybe some of the medicine he was on. he was a heart patient too. He had congenital heart failure, and not congenital, congestive heart failure. And so I'm sure his medications for that were all off schedule, which can also give you problems with mental clarity. So yeah, I mean, there were literally moments on the phone where I would be talking to him and I'm like, I cannot believe this is happening. You know, people who had really a remarkably steady, secure life, now all of a sudden it's just pandemonium. And it's almost like we had no control over decisions that were made, you know, even as their power of attorney or their, you know, health proxy. It was just very, very difficult to get in there and help contribute to what decisions were made, because they were being made, you know, well beyond us. So, yes, all of that crisis kind of led to increasing tensions between, you know, family members and what do we do and how do we handle this. And I think we were being really kind and gentle with each other. It did require a lot of compromise to keep it that way, you know, a lot of just internal, you know, but we made it through, and they both eventually tested negative twice. I picked Mom up first and brought her to my house in Norman for about a week, and then Dad was released, and then they were both back in the assisted living. But it had definitely taken a toll. Like, they aged very quickly over the course of that time. Yeah.
Were they dealing with lingering symptoms?
Dad had a cough for a long time. And, you know, I think it took a while for his fear and temperament to calm back down, you know. He was just so unhappy because he hadn't been around people that loved him, you know, for a year. I mean, my mom, of course, but very lonely, very isolated, and just kind of at his wit's end, you know, for several, I would say for a couple months after he was released. That continued. Yeah.
What stands out to you about when the COVID vaccines became available?
Relief, again. But then also, you know, there was enough controversy about it that I suppose I wasn't completely convinced, you know, of their efficacy and their safety. But the more that I read, and I was fortunate because I was isolated, you know, I didn't have any people coming in and out of the home on a regular basis. So I didn't really worry. I thought, okay, I'm going to see how this plays out. And for a few weeks. So I think I got my first vaccination later, a few months later than everybody else, just to make sure, you know. But I was very relieved. And I got my vaccinations through the Chickasaw Nation, so that was nice. They provided those for tribal members. I mean, even though not Chickasaw, all tribal members. And I did feel relief, but I knew it was effective at reducing the risk, you know, so I was still very cautious because I just didn't want a period. I did not want a period. You know, the horror stories that I was hearing about long COVID, we were all hearing at that point, and not quite sure yet what the symptomology of the thing just kept changing, you know. Long-term things like not getting your taste back, that I just didn't want to put myself at risk for any of that. So I continued to be very cautious.
So after you were able to get your parents back into the assisted living, how did things proceed from there?
Well, because of my dad's sort of sense of urgency around, just wanting to be in a place where he wouldn't feel as lonely, he and my brother, Van, decided that both my mom and my dad would move up to Broken Arrow in a facility there, closer to Van and Van's family. Van has 2 daughters, and the plan was that he would get more visitors. So I wasn't completely thrilled about the idea, primarily because Dad had had the same heart doctor since 1987. And he had a triple heart bypass surgery that year. And Dr. Ghani had been a wonderful doctor that had kept him alive, After a triple heart bypass surgery, to live another 30 years is kind of amazing, And so I didn't like the idea of Dad changing his heart doctor. I didn't like the idea of my parents changing their doctors, period, because healthcare was so strained, during that time period, and like maximum capacity. And I felt a little concerned about that. But they ended up going in the very end of March 2021 to live in an assisted living facility in Broken Arrow. And so that made my trek a little bit longer to go visit them, but I did. And then very rapidly after they moved, Mom fell and broke her hip. Yeah. And that just kind of was the beginning of, of another year, about her last year of life, And I, again, as I mentioned earlier, because she had dementia, she had a form of dementia, vascular dementia, that comes from many strokes over the course of time that you don't even know that you're having. And her symptoms really started to present themselves after she had a couple of surgeries, and the anesthesia. And this is not simply hearsay, but anesthesia can be very hard on older folks. And it can bring forward symptoms that might have otherwise been a little more subtle, become more pronounced. And so she had a lot of trouble with her language, like the language center of the brain, which is a very terrifying thing for a person. It's just hard to not be able to communicate with someone you love so much after communicating with them your whole life, and the things that she couldn't communicate, like I'm hurting here, I don't feel good, or, I'm hungry or anything. So when she fell, again, the hospitals were under the stricter, rules still, where we're only one person in the room at a time. And she needed an advocate with her all the time because she couldn't speak, And so I left Norman. It was finals week of that semester, and went and stayed with her through the hospital, through 2 surgeries, because she contracted MRSA on the first one, so they had to go back in and clean it. And just every procedure, I'm just like, this is so hard on her. This is so hard on her, And Dad, in the meantime, was staying in the assisted living center, and I was trying to visit him. She was in memory care at this point. He had a room in the regular facility. So it was just a lot of juggling. And sure enough, he had, with congestive heart failure, you put on fluid on your heart and lungs. And toward the end of life, you just kind of, it becomes a regular thing. You go in, you get it drained, you come back out, and you adjust your medicine, and you go a little while longer. And so he had his first episode of congestion, and went into the hospital. And of course, he had a new cardiologist, and his medications were completely changed. Medications he'd been on for 30 years, they just took him off and put him on different types of the same kind of thing, but you know, and you just don't, within 3 weeks he passed away. So that was very, very, very like, it is just not the way you want it to go down. You know, your parents being alone when they pass, you know, and being alone for the year prior to their passing, you know, I feel such a sorrow that they had to go through that at the end of their life. After, thankfully, very grateful, they had a very, very good life. And so I can't imagine how shocking it was for them to go through something like that at the end. But yeah, and then I made the decision. My mom had been put on hospice at that point because she had not recovered her ability to walk. And so she needed hospice care to be let back into the facility, memory care. And I just could not leave her there, in Broken Arrow and be so far away. I just couldn't. So I, in good conscience, do that. And so I brought her back here to our house, which we still had, the house where I grew up, and their house. And this is where we spent the last 7 months of her life, and made it as comfortable as possible as I could for her. But during that time, we were still getting our COVID vaccinations. The state did a really good job of vaccinating the homebound. And so you just had to call the Department of Health. And so when it was time for her to get her next one, they just came out and gave it to her. So that was good. We stayed safe in the home most of the time. And the hospice workers were masked, and gloved, and felt very, very certain that they were doing their best to stay clean and keep clean, and as they went from home to home. So I think it felt a little odd because I had to kind of continue the mask practices and the just being extra, wiping down surfaces and those kind of things, longer than anybody else I knew, with the exception of maybe a couple. But yeah, people were, "Are you still doing that?" I'm like, "Well, my parents," and they would get it immediately. But yeah, I mean, just the longer it went, the more, and you were continuing to be the person out in public with a mask on, the weirder it kind of got, going to the grocery store and things like that. But people were generally understanding if they asked, and I told them. So it wasn't that big a hassle, and I actually felt safer. There was kind of a sense of security around it, so it didn't bother me either. Yeah. And I'm glad we know what to do now. If anything like that happens again, which we're told it probably will, we know we're a little bit better prepared. Yeah. Excuse me.
What were some strategies that helped you personally deal with what you were going through?
Walking. Lots of walking. 4-mile walks, 5-mile walks through that little neighborhood in Norman around the university. Just I must have gone in every single direction you could possibly go, from that little, from my corner where I was living at Flood and Lindsay, and and podcasts, trying to think about bigger story, the overstory, or the symbolism of the experiences that I was having, that the world was having, we were all having, what we were learning about connection and relationship, and really trying to mine it, for lessons, intentionally kind of do that, when you think about so much loss and so much death all around the world at once, what can you do if not try to find the meaning and the beauty in it? So listening to podcasts that kind of probed, questions about on that level about it, really got into a podcast about Jungian psychology at that time. Just really trying to figure it out. And just also, my own emotional responses to my parents, because I was carrying anticipatory grief at the same time. So I just kind of tried to, I know it sounds strange, but I tried to learn how to not be afraid of death. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. To just kind of look at it as a part of life, a hard part of life, but a meaningful part of life. Certainly not the end of life, maybe life in the body. But what is there? I just started to find a lot of richness in the darkness, so to speak, and I found a lot of spiritual reassurance that the divine was with us, but couldn't explain it, I couldn't say why or how, but I did find comfort in just kind of pressing into the harder questions around it.
What type of psychology?
Carl Jung, Jungian psychology, yes, because he's so into symbolism. Mm-hmm. And for an English professor, that's my in. You know what I mean? Yeah. So the symbolic life and symbolic thinking and all of that really started to fascinate me. Mm-hmm. Where I could look at these things as maybe less personal, mm-hmm. So yeah, there was something about me that said, if you just face it and look at it, as scary as it is, it's better to look at it and have a kind of conversation with these parts of reality than it is to avoid it through any number of means that I think people were, we were seeing a rise in all kinds of, more puppies, more children, more, certainly more addiction, more drinking, workaholism, all the things, online shopping. And I almost felt like I didn't have the choice to avoid it because it was everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so the thing was just to engage it, and try to learn from it. So I would take long walks and listen to podcasts and
So how are you finding these podcasts? Were they ones that you were already familiar with?
Ones I was already familiar with, yes. But, all the topics kind of shifted to focus on pandemic. So, for instance, this Jungian Life, they talk about a topic every week. It's 3 Jungian psychologists. But they were doing episodes on things like the mask and going into the history of the mask and like the long-standing kind of where it would pop up in different stories, right? Different fairy tales and pieces of literature, and what does it symbolize, right? It symbolizes, for us, it was symbolizing safety, but historically, it also has symbolized many other things, privacy, anonymity, all these different ways of understanding the mask. And I could just listen to that and just really start to, it helped to open up a different way of seeing what was going on, and kind of turned it into a story, and that was unfolding. And so I just tried to engage with it like that. I'm trying to think of other podcasts. I was listening to Esther Perel's relationship podcast. And of course, the couples that were coming on were enduring the pandemic, in the midst of terrible relationship circumstances. So all the themes kind of bent toward the pandemic, in one way or another. It didn't, really matter which podcast or what they normally talked about. It infiltrated somehow. It was woven in there. Music, lots of music, in the little house where I was living. There's always music on, just trying to make it feel more festive and tending to life in the midst of all that death, like plants. I paid a whole lot closer attention to what was growing in my neighborhood and what was blooming when, and just trying to focus on what was good and vibrant and healthy in the midst of all that. Because the lockdown started in the middle of the spring, as we all remember. So being able at least to watch the trees bud and the flowers bloom was a reminder that nature's very resilient. Yeah, just hang on. There's a cycle. There's something bigger that's going on here, and you can worry about it, but it doesn't give you any more control. So it's best just to do what you need to do to stay safe and find beauty in life, even in the hard things. Yeah.
So how was your perspective and your solace in these different things? How did your own background with being Native and your knowledge and belief and story
help?
Yeah.
Oh man, it did. I mean, as I said earlier, I was teaching the class Story is Medicine. And so we had been reading Joseph Bruchak's Native American storytelling, which is, he's gosh darn it. It'll come to me in a minute. But he's affiliated with, one of the tribes back east in like the New York area, a New York State area. Oh my gosh, it'll come to me in a minute. I can see the first 3 letters, but I can't see the rest of it. The name of his tribe. But at any rate, he collects stories from Native communities and has his whole life. I believe he's in his 80s. And so it was just a collection of story after story after story, all based around different themes, that are kind of, I don't want to say universal because that's always dangerous, but, that appear in their own way in tribal cultures that are actually quite different, in many other ways from each other. And so he had them sort of thematically placed around things like balance, and that concept is so central to Cherokee culture. Also, maintaining balance and doing what we can ceremonially to maintain balance in the world, right? Between the worlds, and all these things that are kind of part of our stories and that I've certainly studied in my research as well. It became very useful. Very, very useful to think about it with students and also, on my own time by myself, how can we bring more balance into this situation, right? If the students are panicked in the classroom, and I can see it on their little faces in Zoom, they had kind of deer eyes a lot of the time, just, I'm about to fall apart, but I don't want you to know, just creating space for them to say it, and in the context of that class, Story is Medicine, it was so easy. Just tell me a story, and we do an in-class writing exercise, and they'd go off screen and write and then share it. Like, tell me a story. First of all, identify your primary sort of like emotional descriptors, right? What you've been experiencing. So it might be stress, it might be fear, it might be numbness. And then tell me a story from your day where this feeling arose. And then they could go into it, But using story as a psychological tool, narrative psychology. I wasn't doing it on purpose, but it worked with the theme of the course. Yeah. And of course, our conversations and their stories, just like my podcasts, were at that point infiltrated with what they were doing, to deal with the pandemic. So that was very interesting. I believe, and Cherokee storytellers believe that there is a medicinal value, right? There's a power in stories, because otherwise they wouldn't live so long, right? The oral tradition, they live across generations, and really when you think about what they depend upon, transfer from one mouth to the next mouth, housed in one person's memory to the next person's memory, they kind of have a life of their own, and they inhabit us. And so I was able to tap into that with my students and with myself and my own self-reflections. Where can I share the stories or write the stories, or as Grandma Dorothy says, make the story, who made that story? She'll often say that instead of write. Mm-hmm. So how can we make the story, and intervene in it in a way that balances the narrative out, so that it's not just doom and gloom and dark and fear, but wisdom and growth and beauty and love and care, I don't know. It gave me, I think approaching it that way gave me an agency in it, gave me a sense of agency that at least I could contribute a little bit to the way the story was going, That helped me to think of it that way. Helped me a lot. Mm-hmm. Be the kind person, to the stranger, Don't lose your temper. Be respectful when you're out in the grocery store. Those are little things, but nobody could see you smiling under your mask. No. But they could see your eyes, and mm-hmm. they can hear your tone of voice if you speak to them. And it was interesting. It was like we had to find additional ways to kind of, like I said, balance out the sadness, the fear, the loss, the grief, by compensating somehow, mm-hmm. So that helped a lot. And again, I knew, in terms of traditional beliefs, I think that I knew that, how do I want to put this? Yeah, a lot of the elements, the basic elements of our stories, just fundamental elements, are the very basic things: water, fire, earth, wind, air. Trying to find support even in those very basic things. I mean that literally, like going on hikes, going to swim, at the lake where no one else is, But really just trying to return to those very basic things that sustain us, have always sustained us, to find strength and renewal. I think I'm glad that I did that. I'm glad I just stuck with, and I knew to do that, just the simple things, you know, and that I'm kind of tuned in that way anyway. I think it helped me in that time. Yeah.
Did you journal?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I did journal.
Did you?
Not as much as I wish I would have, you know. I think I say that. Every journaler probably says that, right? But yes, I did journal on a regular basis, particularly when things felt like they were mounting, you know, emotionally, or like my brain just, you know, like I said earlier, was having a hard time staying clear. Journaling did help a lot. It did help a lot. And I'm sure I recorded interesting details, you know, from a, you know, anthropological or ethnographic standpoint. I'm sure there's things in there that are like, oh, that's odd. But a lot of it was focused on my feelings about my folks, you know. A lot of it was processing that too. So I doubt that, you know, would have, some of that would have been the same regardless of the pandemic. But details of the day, like that kind of journaling. Oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. I did a little bit of that too. I forget what those kind of journals are called, but they come in handy for historians to just have just day to day, like I did this, I did this, I did this. Those kinds of journals are helpful too. So maybe 20 years from now, I'll look back on it and think, this could be worth something to someone. I don't know. But it was a great relief to be able to do that. I think making things, period. A lot of crafting.
Oh, like what?
What was I making at the time? Oh, t-shirt quilts from all my old t-shirts. Yeah. I went on a t-shirt cutting tear because I had more t-shirts than I knew what to do with. So I just started cutting the fronts of them and stitching them together and putting them on backing. And of course, masks. We were making masks, cooking, those kinds of basic activities. It's a lot of genius in them. I remember one time when I was in college, I came home and, you know, I had been going through a period of melancholy and depression. And one day it must have just been all over me. My mom could tell that I wasn't feeling good. And she sat me down on the couch and she gave me a skein of yarn and a crochet needle. And she taught me how to crochet, you know. So I think I just know that having something to do with your hands, at least for me, whether it's writing or stitching or beading or whatever it's going to be, cooking, is so helpful to get you out of your mind and into your body. Yeah.
Now that we're 3 years past when this all started, what have you seen any persistent changes in students?
Oh my, yeah.
Like what?
I think some of them, like me, and so I continue to be patient, but some of them are still struggling with executive functioning. Things like deadlines and prioritizing, remembering, you know, organizing, just the basic executive functions of the brain. I think for some of them are still a struggle. And so basically, you know, what that amounts to is just giving them a little bit more time and supporting them and being compassionate, not judging them, you know, but saying, I understand, you know, and sitting down and what would be helpful. Do we need to talk about your idea for your project? Do we need to come up with some sources? There still seems to be a percentage of students that need the additional help with those things. Now, this year, I believe we graduated the seniors that came in as freshmen in 2019. So their entire college experience was thrown off the track, you know, from the beginning. And they at least the English majors that I taught and that graduated this year, I also think there's been kind of a boon for them during all this time because, educational boon to some extent because of the way the world responded to the pandemic, because it wasn't just, oh my gosh, we're all on lockdown and now we have to stay away from each other and deal with the loneliness. But there was, the violence against the police violence against, Black bodies was going on. The whole issue with the Confederate monuments, there was just a lot of social unrest during this period too for them, that I think at the time they experienced as overwhelm, but I truly think really advanced them in ways, like it grew them in ways, it matured them in ways, right? So the seniors that we graduated this year who are our English majors, they're graduating as undergraduates, but it's almost like their consciousness, their historical consciousness, their political consciousness, which you always see kind of expand in undergraduate population over the course of their education. But in this case, it just exponential because they started to see how things are connected. The pandemic was connected to the racial tension, for them. They started to see things that the relationship between aspects of life and society, in ways I'm not sure they would have had the pandemic not happened. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I think it was kind of an explosion of intellectual growth for some of them, because they had to learn so much so fast, and because this particular group of students was insisting, and to a certain degree, on talking about these things in the classroom. And of course, I insist on that too. And education has to be relevant, to be made real, to be made personal to the students. It has to be relevant to them. So it has been wonderful to be able to make the classroom a space during this time where we can take a time out for processing hard things, using, in many cases, course readings to kind of parse them out. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like I'll give an example if that's more helpful. This past spring, I taught American Indian nonfiction, and I wanted them to start with Angie DeBose and Still the Waters Run. And if you've read it, everyone should. But and I know you have, Karen, that it's very hard to slog. Not because it's hard to read. That's not it. She's a wonderful writer, but the information, the facts that it forwards are hard facts about where we live and the history of our place. And these students are now at a point where they can ask questions when those kind of materials are presented in class that they might not have been able to ask before. They see angles on it that they would not have seen prior to the pandemic. For instance, they're much more tuned in to, as a Native American, literature and cultural studies professor, they're much more tuned in to just the Native American history period than I've ever seen before in the past. Again, on average, we've still got a long way to go, but they make those connections much faster. They can see the connections between capitalism and allotment and, oil, and when the oil industry took off in Oklahoma. And you don't have to do as much as explaining because it falls together for them. And I think in a lot of ways that's because of what they witnessed through the pandemic and with the political situations. But they get asked questions also that are hard to answer, like, how do we have hope? How do we have hope?
Mm-hmm.
They've been through so much, and it's almost like the veil has been blown off, a little bit more thoroughly maybe than they might have experienced otherwise. We will never know. But they're still trying to come up with answers for what do we do now that we know this systemic racism still exists, the very same thing that we see happening. How do we handle it effectively, and how do we handle it without hate in our hearts or the blindness that bias brings? How do we do it differently, really? And they're struggling to think there's a way sometimes. But I always tell them, sorry, you don't have the option to give up hope. You know what I mean? I know you can have a few days, maybe a month or a year or two, where it's hard to come by. Like, I get that, but you cannot say there's no hope,
mm-hmm.
because you're the hope, right? You're the hope. So, sorry. And I try to point out how things have improved. I tell them, when I was your age, we would not have talked about this stuff in the college classroom. First of all, we weren't even talking. We were listening,
Yeah.
We were listening. We were being lectured to, which is not a bad way to do it. I'm not criticizing that, but it feels more democratic to me to be able to have discussions with students. Lecture a little bit, maybe, or answer a question at length if they ask you to. But, that's improvement. I try to tell them the fact that we're able to talk about the tensions between Native Americans and African Americans in the classroom, and how white supremacy sets us all up for those tensions, and how even, the fact that we can talk about it is just mind-blowing to me in the classroom, and how can we be good allies, to each other, regardless of race, which is not even a biological thing.
Mm-hmm.
They are so much more ready to have those conversations. In fact, they start them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'm just along for the ride.
Yeah.
So I can see both. I can see where it's been harder on them, but I think it's like everything that's hard, there's a gift in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a gift in there, and I think it's positioned them well, as far as to continue their educations, which many of the English majors do, and or otherwise go out in the world and make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
I think their awareness is increased and their consciousness is increased in ways that when I was their age, I don't think that we experienced.
Mm-hmm. Do you teach graduate students?
I do.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But are you curious how they handled it?
Mm-hmm.
Graduate students, part of graduate student life is very much about building a cohort, with your other, your fellow students, fellow grad students. And that was not possible during the pandemic, And I'm very much a person who believes in collaborative learning and collaborative research, and they didn't have the opportunity to collaborate. And so I think I noticed a greater propensity for them to be isolated, kind of siloed off from each other in their own work, as opposed to conversing. Now, of course, being that I'm no longer a graduate student, I truly don't know what they were doing when I wasn't around. But I definitely got the feeling that they were a little more to themselves than I've seen other cohorts, which kind of saddened me because it's hard to be a graduate student, And it's isolating under normal conditions because you're reading all the time, or writing all the time. And so you're just kind of by yourself. But there is that fundamental exchange that happens when you're, in a classroom together, or, sharing an office, as a teaching assistant, where you're exchanging ideas in a much less formal setting. And that's a part of learning too. And I feel like that's maybe been lacking. And because I notice in myself my own tendency not to just eagerly return to, I guess, I don't want you to say complete social engagement. I do wonder if what will return. I think we're still figuring that out. What's going to be permanently changed or modified, or, and I think graduate education is one of those things that may have some long-term, changes to still work out. Yeah. Because, you want to get together and go out to dinner and, have activities and do things with your fellow graduate students. And I just have seen much less of that. Much, much less of that.
Interesting.
Less socializing. But kind of academic work is just as strong, if not stronger. Perhaps because there's less distraction, or there has been with the pandemic. But yeah, less socialization. And that's sad. And then with the faculty too. I mean, honestly, I'm not talking out of school. I think we're less engaged with each other than we were before, because we're not on campus at the same time. People are spending less time actually there in their offices working, and they're working from home, and as a result of the change. So yeah, I think we're still going to see some fallout. Yeah. Even though we're 3 years out, we're seeing it now, and we'll probably continue to see it. Yeah.
What are some ways that your everyday life changed because of the pandemic, and what is permanent of those?
Oh, yes.
What do you think?
I sleep later. I'm still more tired.
Did you contract COVID? Maybe I shouldn't ask.
No, I did not.
Yeah.
Not that I know of. It's just everything else about it, I guess. But I still find I need more sleep. I'm not as overcome by my to-do list as I used to be. I have more free time in my day where oftentimes I'm just, what do I do? I have plenty to do, but I think what's changed is there's not the immediate thought of do it now. You have to do it now. The rush, rushing around, the busyness, the frenetic, that I had beforehand. I don't have that. Yeah. And I kind of miss it, to be honest with you, because it feels strange to have quite like downtime. And at first, where it was uncomfortable with lockdown, where everybody was a little antsy and what do I do with this? I think like I said, I liked it. So it was relief. So I think that has become just kind of part of who I am, like more stillness, not so much.
So a shift in your sense of time?
Definitely. A shift in my sense of time. It's a little bit more subordinated. Yeah. To, I don't necessarily schedule myself the way I used to. Yeah. Because first of all, we couldn't. And then I liked it. And now I'm just kind of like, I really kind of just want to keep some space in my day for stretching or staring out the window or, a nap, So I haven't crammed my life back up with things again.
Is there more kindness and grace toward yourself?
Well, there has had to be, for sure. I definitely still have my moments where I get frustrated that I'm not able to be as productive as I used to be. And I worry, will I ever be as productive? You know, I definitely have those concerns because it's a value in our workforce productivity. But it's not necessarily a value that I have ever cherished myself. Does that make sense? To me, presence is more important, and process is more important, and just kind of being with my work, my family life, my friends in a more complete way, as opposed to being preoccupied with so many tasks, has become more important to me. And that I can definitely give myself grace for.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, number one, it makes me happier, makes my work better, it makes my life richer, you know. And so what if I'm not as productive, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because what I'm producing is more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So that I can definitely give myself grace for. Helps me to give myself grace for not being so productive, because I almost feel like I have a greater sense of integrity
Mm-hmm.
when I slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Looking back, is there anything that you would do differently?
Lots.
Mm-hmm.
There really is. There really is a lot I would do differently. I think I would have been more insistent on bringing my folks out of that assisted living center, just to give them more quality of life, you know, in the last few months of their lives. I guess, I don't know why at the time I was hesitant to move them back here. I guess being here with both my parents was harder for me to imagine, you know, than being here to take care of my mom while she was on hospice. But I wish that we could have found something closer to Norman. That was the other thing. I didn't want to, which I do now, but I didn't want at that time to have the commute, you know. But I wish I'd have been a little bit more forceful with my dad and my brothers about trying to make arrangements that would bring them back into a home space where they could have someone with them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's the fundamental thing that I would have done differently that comes to my mind first. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think I probably I would have started grief counseling a lot earlier. I really did not realize how much grief was impacting me. Because I think we just traditionally think you grieve when someone dear to you passes. Well, actually, you can grieve for many things, you know. You can grieve for everything that happens with someone that you love who's on their way towards passing. Yes. You can grieve for a world that's in the middle of terrible loss. I mean, all of those things are grief. And I think I would have maybe, if I could go back and do it again, educated myself a little bit more on the impacts grief has on the brain, you know, and maybe advocated for myself and other people, you know, a little bit differently with that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Because you really feel like when you're going through it and you're not educated, you think, I should be handling this better. Well, actually, no, because your brain is doing what it's supposed to do, and this is what it does, you know, when you're going through something like this. So be patient, you know, and be patient with others, and advocate when you need patience from people. Advocate for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those two things.
We may already touched on this, but is there anything positive that you have seen come out of this time during the pandemic?
Yeah. I think that I'm probably not the only person who is still maintaining kind of a slowdown, and I do think that's good. I think it's kind of against the grain or the current in our society, and it feels unnatural, but it's actually quite natural, very natural. I don't think we were ever meant to be paced as fast as we tend to pace ourselves. I think it's made me think about what I want from here, the aspects of my life that I would like to change in order to be maybe a little bit more in line with who I am. I've had a lot of time and space to think about that, so I think that's a good thing. I think it's strengthened a lot of relationships. I know a lot of relationships were strained, but for me, I've also experienced a lot of growth with friendships, in particular. Watching people go through however the pandemic landed in their lives, and trying to support each other from afar in the midst of all that. I mean, I think it just really taught me a lot about relationship and loving connection and the need for that, the value of it. I mean, really, we were built for it in ways that I think we really underestimate. And I'm glad that for me, and at least a lot of the people that I know, that it's really underscored the value of those relationships, So I think that's a good thing. I think there were a lot of lessons that we could have learned that we didn't, I think we could have learned so much about our healthcare system and what we need to do to improve it, particularly around vulnerable populations, which I include my parents in that, because people in their 80s are vulnerable.
Yes.
I'm here to tell you. But also just, lower income populations, or, like we know what happened in the Native communities in some cases, but accessible healthcare, I think became a real concern during the pandemic. And I hope maybe there are somewhere people are studying that to figure out how we can improve for next time. I was really happy the week we all went on lockdown. I think it was those 2 weeks, spring break, and those 2 weeks afterwards, that traffic was reduced, and you could hear the birds in the neighborhood around campus, and I know in other parts of the world, waterways cleared, and things like that, smog dissipated.
Yeah.
Those would be included in the lessons I wish we would have learned from the pandemic, that it helps when we stay home, helps the planet stay home and do less, And I think those who were paying attention really, really did gain a fundamental sense of the ways in which we're all connected, and how the story brings us all together in ways we can't really imagine otherwise. I think there were moments in the pandemic where we saw that in true form, if we were paying attention. And I think that's a good thing.
Is there anything I haven't asked that you would like to share?
No, I think we've been pretty thorough.
I think so.
Yes. Maybe one thing, and I think that is, in addition, this goes along with the lessons that we've learned. I have definitely learned so much about how women carry so much responsibility during these kinds of times. Not just with my family and the caring with my parents, which I know women oftentimes are caregivers for their elderly parents above other, like their male siblings or so on and so forth. But I even think about women in the nursing field, in the hospice caregivers that came to take care of my mom, the women, the educators, the teachers, who are majority women, and all the weight that they lifted and carried collectively. And I think that the pandemic really helped me to see that in greater relief. I just want to give I just wanted to say I appreciate that. I see it. I appreciate it. Mm-hmm. And I wish it was more equitable. Mm-hmm. But I think other than that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for giving me your space and time.
Yes.
To talk about your experience.
Well, thank you for letting me contribute it. Yeah, I hope it fills in the archive a little more.
Well, it does. Yeah, your experience was more unique and more challenging, I think, in some ways than a lot of people. So
it certainly felt that way, but you never know. Yeah, because you're only you. But.
Yeah, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so this is part 2.
Yes, we thought of one more thing we wanted to add. Yes.
Yeah, we did have a little more to contribute to the interview.
I forgot.
So show me what you have.
Well, I wanted to share some pictures of my parents since they were so much a part of my life, but also my pandemic experience. This is them when they were in high school, mm-hmm. at Scheidler High School. It's Jim and Connie Jackson. Does it show up?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
And then...
So did they date in high school?
Oh, yes. That's where they met.
Yeah.
They started dating in high school. And Dad went to Germany after the war to help with the Reconstruction. And Mom went to college at Oklahoma College for Women. And then they got married in 3 years. She finished in 3 years, and he came back from Germany, and they married in 1956. And here's just some pictures of them as they got older. Wipe the dust off. That's my mom in her tear dress.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Yeah. She loved to go tell stories at the schools. And so she would always wear her dress and go tell Cherokee stories. She was an elementary school teacher, so she had lots of friends who would bring her into her class in Native American History Month or something. And this is just my dad in his bow tie. He had a famous bow tie collection.
I'm going to adjust these.
Okay.
Was your mom raised with Cherokee traditions?
Well, her dad his first language was Cherokee. So she did grow up with some exposure to the language, mm-hmm. particularly with his relatives when they were around. But this is Dad.
Okay.
But
I think I made it worse. I'm trying to.
Is it too dark?
For the glare.
Well, we might have to just take pictures.
Let's try angling it down.
Okay, see what happens.
What that does. Gosh.
That any better?
Cameras and lighting. Yes, that is much better.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that was probably taken maybe about 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
But, they ceremonial practices, I don't think Mom grew up going to ceremonial practices, but they definitely went to dances. But, I don't know that they went to ceremonial grounds. I don't think they did. But they definitely went to powwows and social dances and things like that.
So were you raised going?
I went to a few, again, because my parents grew up this is them, they came to the OU campus. They're sitting on a bench. Yes, but they're just so sweet. And then this is a few months before we put them in assisted living. I just think it's so funny because they're like kids.
Yeah, that one I'm getting some.
So
glare. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's a good. Okay, now I can zoom in. Got rid of the glare. Oh, yeah, sweet. Yeah.
Yes. But they would take me to all the national holidays, the Cherokee national holidays. But then my grandmother, my mom's mom, was also really good friends with a lot of the Indian women up in, they lived in Shiloh. So she had Kaw friends, she had Ponca friends, she had lots of different friends. My mom's mother herself was not enrolled, but she had lots of friends, just the women up in that country. So we would go to the Kaw powwow or, the Ponca powwow, and we'd just sit and with her friends. And sometimes I'd get my courage up and get up and go do a little dance, a little round dance or something. But we went to the Cherokee national holidays every year when I was a kid. And Mom knew a lot of stories about our family. She loved genealogy, and so she could tell a lot of stories about our family's history. And in addition, she loved the oral tradition, so she knew Cherokee stories and told them to her students and to other women's classes. So I definitely always knew I was Cherokee, Yeah. I wish I would have grown up with the language, but I took Cherokee as a graduate student at OU and continue to try to study it when I can. But I wish I knew it because it's a beautiful language. My grandfather did, but that just shows you how quick it can happen.
Yes.
Just my mom and then me, and I have had to learn it from scratch. So. Yep.
Yeah. Well, those are nice. Thank you.
Yes.
For sharing
yeah.
getting those in. Okay.